The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster, and everything was still, absolutely still. If you're watching this and you're under, say, 30 years old or so, you probably grew up with Magic Treehouse. If you're a parent or a grandparent of kids 30 or under, you probably spent some time reading this to your kids. So my name is John Long. I'm the Director of Education here at the National D-Day Memorial, joined with our President, April Cheek-Messier, to discuss Danger in the Darkest Hour was the original title. This particular one is World at War 1944, #1 super edition, which means it's a little bit longer than the regular Magic Treehouse books. But for a change in our book discussions, we're going to talk about a kid's book on D-Day. Because I believe that's actually a very important thing for us to try to encourage.
It's a fun read.
It is.
It really is. Much. Even for adults, I think it's a fun read. And it is very important because part of our mission, of course, is to make sure young people understand the significance of D-Day and World War II. And I think this really puts kids there in a very real way. Mary Pope Osborne, I think, is a wonderful author. She's done a great job. And I'll just mention a couple of things about her because she's a very talented author. She has a great imagination. But some things that you might find interesting. First of all, a wonderful quote of hers: "Writing is a miracle. You can travel anywhere in the world to any time, any place, and still be home in time for dinner." I love that because it's so true.
Or bedtime.
Or bedtime. And one of the stories that she was inspired by as a child, which was one of my favorite book collections, the Little House on the Prairie series, is a series that she really got inspired from as a child. And I dug out my copy, which I'm not going to tell you how old it is because I'm not going to date myself. But what a wonderful story. So I think these kinds of books are so important to inspire young people in so many ways. And as a basically historical fiction book, it's I think a great introduction for kids into that genre. So really wonderful. A few things about Mary Pope Osborne. She was not born during World War II. She was born in 1949, but she was a military brat. She traveled everywhere, and they went around the world. And she remembers so many of the stories about World War II because she kind of grew up on posts where it was still very much very real. You know, it hadn't been that long ago, and it was she heard these stories from these veterans, and so. It was something that she remembers quite a bit, and watching World War II movies, a lot of those. And she has said before that moving was never traumatic for me, but staying in one place was. So I think that's an interesting perspective into who she is, because I think her books, her life and traveling, I think inspired so many of these stories that we read. Have you read very many of them?
I've read several of them to my kids, and that's what April and I have in common. We've got kids school age, and we've done a lot of bedtime reading.
Oh,
yeah. And my kids have thoroughly enjoyed Magic Treehouse, not just having them read to them, but reading them on their own. And so I won't claim that we've read every single one, and I can exhaustively explain the series, and we certainly have read them in order. So often our kids will just at the library pick out one that sounded interesting because it's about dinosaurs or dolphins or whatever. The one about World War II, it's kind of an obvious no-brainer for my kids. So this is one we certainly read several times. But a little bit about the series, if you're not familiar with Magic Treehouse. The two main characters there on the front are Jack and Annie, brother and sister, who get involved in the very first book with basically the court of Merlin the magician and some of his fellow magicians and wizards and whatever. And they are sent through the agency of this magic treehouse that spins around and travels through time to various places in history, usually with some sort of mission and some contrived story of a artifact they have to get or something. And along the way, they have to do problem solving. They've got to learn their history. I love the fact that Jack is always taking notes because
He's
you
the
know what
thinker.
he is the thinker. But you know what a great skill to encourage kids taking notes about things. Annie is a lot more of the
Adventurous.
yeah, exactly.
She's the adventurous.
Leap before thinking about things, and Jack is more hesitant, and they make a very good team along the way. And so far, they've always solved their problems and come back. So
and it's great for kids because as you and I both experience, we have children, boys and girls, and what a wonderful tool for parents or for teachers because it really appeals to all kids. I mean, I think you have two children in the story, a boy and a girl. So very smart on the part of Mary Pope Osborne to create these two heroes of the story who were a young boy and a young girl on these adventures. And I think that's really what's so appealing about the series too. You know, a book about kids is going to appeal to kids, especially when you're dealing with historical topics like this one does. And I will say my other favorite one is the one on the Titanic, which is a great one. But, you know, appealing to kids with these deeper stories, but using young people to tell the stories. You know, obviously a very good tactic there, but
explaining what they see to bring out some history. I think if you read one of these, and it's a really broad range that Mary Pope Osborne brings in from, you know, ancient Greece and Egypt up to modern times. In some cases, I seem to recall one that's even set in the future. So not all World War II. Obviously, they visit the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and then a lot of the earthquake in San Francisco and
Egypt. They go to so many different.
And whichever one you read, you're going to learn at least a little bit about that historical context. So I've always appreciated that she's not only telling a good story, but she is teaching some history and some culture along the way as well.
And this one is very specific because we do step into when they go back in time, they were actually June 4th, 1944, 2 days before, of course, the Normandy invasion. And so this is a particularly difficult subject matter. How do you think she treated that in your opinion?
And that is one of my thoughts about this book. And you mentioned the Titanic book because it's also somewhat the same way. It's telling really difficult, in some ways troubling stories, and yet doing it in a way that not only is compelling and informative, but also I think you know, age appropriate. So you know, we're dealing here not just with D-Day itself, or technically a day or two before D-Day, but also touches on Nazism, anti-Semitism, the oppression of the French people. Difficult subjects, important subjects, told at a kid's level. And by the time they get through the last chapter, they've learned something about it. And of course, it's a happy ending because it is a kid's book, but not entirely a happy story. And let's say the Titanic book, very similar to one in the San Francisco earthquake. You know, great disasters. We know, kind of in the background, not described, but we know, you know, there are many lives lost in all of these, and yet story is told in a way that I think kids get the lesson, but not in a way that's going to give them bad dreams.
Well, and I think that's the key, is because I do think at times she's criticized for softening the history a little too much. And I would disagree with that. I think when you really look at the age level, I mean, my daughter is 7 and we're starting to read these. These are, again, very difficult topics. And I think what Mary Pope Osborne is trying to do more than anything is to start the conversation, is that we don't want to create these scenes as that they're dealing with really the intense trauma of what was unfolding in World War II, but it does open the conversation to what was happening, so you can have that difficult decision or conversations with your child as you go through it, but not in a way that's going to keep them up at night with bad dreams and things like that. This is, again, it's just a starter book, really, you know, first graders, second graders. I think it's really perfect at that age to start talking to them about this history. And then you just kind of continue from there. But it is a very difficult topic, but I do think she handles it well.
Let me commend her for another thing, because again, we've read a lot of bedtime stories to kids through the years, and you're probably aware some stories are so hard to read aloud. But hers aren't. You can read them. The kids, once they're old enough to read, can read them to themselves. But it's really not a burden for the parents to read them aloud either. And so that's not a commendation I can make about every kid's book that I've read.
No, and I think her books, because of the age level that you're reading to, I think it's very important what she does. And she does not have a lot of fluff in the writing. It's pretty straightforward. And the action starts right away. In every book, you really, you're off in the treehouse, you're spinning your way to the next adventure. So it really doesn't wait. And I think that's important for young kids, especially as they're learning to read and they're reading these stories. You need the action to kind of happen. And I think they do. And I I think she does that very well.
This one starts with a carrier pigeon.
Yes, let's talk about the pigeon.
Another story that's not often told about World War II.
So Commando is the name of the pigeon who appears in the beginning of the story that really sets the story up. And some people might think that was a little far-fetched, but it's not, is it?
Well, no more than a spinning magic treehouse.
Well, true. However, there was a National Pigeon Service in World War II, and it was extraordinarily important as couriers for the war to get messages through the combat lines and things like that. These pigeons, they were very, very important. So I love that she starts it off.
The very first report of D-Day arrived by carrier pigeon. There was radio silence. They couldn't tell anything else yet.
And there's so many stories during the war of these pigeons getting through with important messages that saved lives. So this was a critical part of the war effort. And so I'd love that she uses that to kind of get the story going. So great little pieces like that. So do you think, just in reading through the book, you talked a little bit about just the fact that there are a lot of themes that run through here as well. Do you think that there's some reoccurring themes, but do you think one of them is obviously this idea of who can you trust or not trust?
Right.
Do you think she presents that well? Is that a good?
I think she does, and again, not in a way that's going to give kids bad dreams.
Yeah.
But I think it makes it clear what was in the minds of a lot of kids in France during World War II is, this guy over here in a German uniform, obviously we're going to keep our distance, but what about our neighbors? Some of them may be collaborators, some of them may be in the resistance, and Jack and Annie have to kind of navigate that as well. So they learn early on that the V for victory sign.
Which is used a lot, which is probably overused in the story because we know that you weren't really going around freely in France doing that. But again, she's making a point.
Exactly.
Coming together, and I think that's
and some
really
respond well, and some turn out exactly. They almost get caught.
Exactly, and I think that she does a great job of showing that being on edge and that the fear. And I do think she does a great job of capturing that for young readers. There's this fear that existed at that time in these situations where you didn't know who you could trust. And you had to watch around every corner with someone listening to you. It was especially part of the French resistance. And I think she highlights really the bravery and the courage of so many in the French resistance who through little acts helped change the war and turn the tide of the war. And I love the story of Tom and Theo, I think, the family that they meet who takes them in. And they talk about their twins who were distributing flyers. And I think the flyers says something like hope and courage, freedom soon. And they are captured. So that was so true during that time of all of those who, in little ways, they were little acts of resistance. But they could be absolutely deadly. I mean, if you were caught doing any of those things, but it was all those little things stitched together that helped turn the tide of the war. So I think those stories are so important to show what people can do when they come together and they help one another to defeat something as this tyranny that existed at that time. Some great little stories there in the book. So I like that a lot.
And the theme of courage also shines through. And again, I won't try to explain the full plot and all the characters, because you've got, Merlin characters
yes.
from, imaginary versus these historical characters in World War II. But the idea was they were going to rescue one particular, enchantress, she's called, who'd been just lost in action. And to do that, they're going to get a magic wand. Of course, it's Magic Tree House. There's a lot of kind of magic themes throughout all of them. But they parachute in, which I love that idea of kids parachuting into France too, prior to V-Day. But they parachute in and forget the wand, and they get there and they suddenly realize we don't have that fallback of magic. We've got to figure this out ourselves. And everything from learning who to trust to Jack driving a truck at one point when he's 9, 8, 9, I forget his age, but
learning the clutch and but that is a great part of the story, is that suddenly, unlike some of the other stories, the magical powers are gone, and you're relying on your powers. It's what's within. It's your believing in yourself. I think I really took that away as reading the story, is that if you believe in yourself, then you have those powers. You can achieve great things, and I love that because I think that really comes through in the story as well. And there's one part of the story where Kathleen, is the enchantress, is saying she has certain powers, and Jack believes her, and she really didn't.
That's right. Make them invisible.
He achieved it all by himself, so it was just kind of a nice touch. And so there's those little themes that run through the book that I think are very important for young people today, particularly as they're growing up and learning what powers and skills that they have. I love that.
Right. And of course, important in World War II setting. Here are the resources we have and the job that needs to get done. But also just kind of a life skill that I think kids can take away from not just this particular volume, but a lot of Magic Tree Houses. You have these skills and abilities that you need to develop and figure out for yourself. Because we don't, much as might want, we don't really get magic wands.
No, we often wish we had a magic wand, but that's not always the case. What other takeaways do you take from the book? Lessons learned.
Excuse me. As I like the fact that she presented some of these very difficult themes, and softened them for make them age appropriate, but didn't avoid them, like anti-Semitism. So toward the end, there's a whole group of Jewish children that need to be rescued. That wasn't part of their original assignment, but they figure out on their own how we're going to do this. And then toward the end, if I can find the right page here. Toward the end, Annie draws her conclusions when they finally get back to Frog Creek Woods. She draws her conclusion. That a lot of people have to choose to do the right thing in these difficult situations, and a lot of them did. Not all of them, obviously, but there were a lot of them that decided we're going to do the right thing. So she says toward the end, I don't understand it, said Anne. And this is after they're back safe and sound and kind of reflecting on things. I don't understand it. Why would anyone want to hurt people like Sophie and Sarah and their parents, or Tom and Theo, or the old man at the train station? I don't know, said Jack. And how could anyone want to hurt those little kids? What if the Nazis had caught Leo and Eli and all the others? Jack shuddered. It was unbearable to think about. And then she goes on. They realize that our enemies in World War II now are our friends, Germany and Japan and Italy, friendly nations, trade partners, good relationship. And she says, let's think about that instead. And let's think about Gaston and Suzette and Sylvie and Tom and Theo and the driver of the milk truck, all trying to do the right thing. During war, I think lots of people try to do the right thing. Don't you? Yes, said Jack. And then they also reflect on the life of freedom that they enjoy. This is right at the very last page of the book.
Right.
And a good conclusion.
And I love that too, because I do think it, for all of us, as a lesson that we often take that freedom for granted. And when they come back, it's the little things that suddenly they are really appreciating and treasure, just those little things. I think she says, like the freedom to ride our bikes to the lake and the library, the freedom to watch movies and eat popcorn and play Scrabble with mom and dad and cook outside on the grill and visit our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And Jack says, yeah, a million things like that. Right now, he had a whole new appreciation for the familiar, ordinary things in life. And, you think about the atrocities of the war, the Holocaust, and just how many of those moments were taken from those young children and from the parents and from those. It's really overwhelming, but what a great ending to the story to remind us, let's be thankful for the freedoms that we have. So that's a beautiful, beautiful piece. And like you said too, just the fact that there's it's important to remember when we think about all the bad that takes place, that there's also a lot of good, and just the fact that there are people who are willing to risk everything to protect those freedoms and to help one another. That really shines through, and I love those stories. So she does a really nice job with that. So some great lessons, I think.
Absolutely true, and a lot of the other books as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I meant to look up how many of these have been written. There's a whole series of Merlin missions that come later on that are a little more fantastical, less grounded in history. And I think geared a little more toward older. The idea was the kids that start out with, Magic Treehouse #1, they're aging as the book series ages. So eventually get to a point where some of them are too young for you, but they go on to other adventures. So again, as a parent and one who's read a lot of nighttime stories, certainly recommend it for kids.
Certainly would. It's definitely worth a purchase. And what I really like about this one too, as you mentioned, even though she softens the story and doesn't go into great detail with some of the things. For example, during the story itself, she never mentions the word Holocaust, even though that's what she's referring to. But what I love at the end of this is that she really defines what those World War II terminology. She really kind of goes into more detail with that. She talks about it's kind of basically a little section on definitions and information about World War II, which I think is really helpful. If you're a parent, a grandparent, and you're talking to your child about this, this gives you a lot more detailed information that's obviously all factual. So really,
and usually a companion volume go with a lot of these.
Tracker,
right?
Yes, which is fantastic, and that's another great addition.
If you read one on ancient China, and it really captures your kid's attention, and you can kind of encourage that.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's wonderful. So yeah, I think again, overall, great book. She does a great job of broaching a topic that's very serious, but imparting a lot of lessons in the process. So really well done. So if you're wondering whether to purchase one, you should.
And if your kids or your grandkids, again, it's a great encouragement, not only to read, which I think we all agree kids need to read more than stare at screens. But say a book that's going to get across some very good messages.
That's right.
Which again, not all kids' books really do. So happy to recommend this one, and encourage anyone to learn more about the Second World War, because this is a story that's we need to remember, but also we need to make sure that there's a generation of history buffs coming after us to help keep the stories alive.
Very, very important. That's so key. And so stories like this really help with that, help share those stories. And again, the little there's some other wonderful books out there. Number the Stars is one that I think of, but that's a little heavier. It's a little, but if you're looking for something again for a lower grade level, I think this is the book. So wonderful. And we have some events coming up as well.
Yes, we do.
So
A lot of them.
Yeah, we have a lot. September for the memorial is very, very busy. So we just want to remind everyone to check our website at dday.org. Keep a check on all of our events. September, we have some wonderful things coming. For example, our poppies are back. We'll be putting one red poppy out for every D-Day fatality, 4,415 poppies to be exact. But also doing that in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So hard to believe, 20 years. So that'll be, I think, a very moving event. So we encourage you. That is September 3rd, I believe, through the 12th, that you can come up and view that. It's also in honor of our first responders. Our first responders and nurses and doctors have certainly had a very challenging year and a half. And so this is really to honor all of them as well. So we hope people will come up and see that. And then we have another lecture coming very soon, September 9th, from France. So we're excited about that. Florian Plano will be here. Well, not here. He will be with us, but in France with a wonderful story that actually centers around our sculpture, Le Monument aux Morts, which is a great history to talk about that. So I think everyone will enjoy Flo. He's a wonderful speaker. And then a couple of other events. What do we have on September 17th, John? That's an important one.
September 17th is POW MIA Day, national recognition of those who are prisoners of war during that experience or still missing in action. And we will have our annual commemoration back live and in person after a year of COVID. And we are going to recognize and honor some of the Virginians who are no longer missing in action because they've been identified, and remind us of all those who, and it's in the hundreds of Virginians from World War II up through modern times that are still missing in action.
Great. That'll be a wonderful ceremony. So we look forward to that. And then we have our Air Force birthday on September 18th. So free admission for our veterans of the United States Air Force and current military personnel with the Air Force. So we look forward to that. And then a very special event on September 21st as well. We have NASCAR great Richard Petty and Kyle Petty coming to the memorial. And so we're really excited to greet them and have them come up for an event that day. And we just ask that you check our website for all of the details on any of these events, and there's more. So we'll just leave it at that, but really hope everybody will come up for the month of September and see all these wonderful events that are going on. And we have more lectures coming soon as well. One toward the end of the month, I should mention that one as well. So
23rd, I believe, we'll have a virtual tour of the Museum of the Pacific War,
I'm excited
which is
about
in
that.
Texas. And we look forward to that partnership with another museum. And also I'll point out September is a great time to visit. The weather kind of cools off, humidity drops, and the leaves start to change on the mountain. It's a great time to come to the National D-Day Memorial in September.
Absolutely. So check our website, and thank you all for joining us today. And please let us know if there's some books you would like us to include in our virtual book club. We'd love to have your suggestions, and we'll add that to the list. And thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.